This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. Chapter 13. Molly Gibson's New Friends. Time was speeding on. It was now the middle of August. If anything was to be done to the house, it must be done at once. Indeed, in several ways Mr. Gibson's arrangements with Miss Browning had not been made too soon. The squire had heard that Osborne might probably return home for a few days before going abroad, and, though the growing intimacy between Roger and Molly did not alarm him in the least, yet he was possessed by a very hearty panic lest the heir might take a fancy to the surgeon's daughter, and he was in such a fidget for her to leave the house before Osborne came home, that his wife lived in constant terror lest he should make it too obvious to their visitor. Every young girl of 17 or so, who is at all thoughtful, is very apt to make a pope out of the first person who presents to her a new or larger system of duty than that by which she has been unconsciously guided hitherto. Such a pope was Roger to Molly. She looked to his opinion, to his authority on almost every subject, yet he had only said one or two things in a terse manner which gave them the force of precepts, stable guides to her conduct, and had shown the natural superiority in wisdom and knowledge which is sure to exist between a highly educated young man of no common intelligence and an ignorant girl of 17, who yet was well capable of appreciation. Still, although they were drawn together in this very pleasant relationship, each was imagining some one very different for the future owner of their whole heart, their highest and completest love. Roger looked to find a grand woman, his equal and his empress, beautiful in person, serene in wisdom, ready for counsel, as was Egeria. Molly's little wavering maiden fancy dwelt on the unseen Osborne, who was now a troubadour, and now a knight, such as he wrote about in one of his own poems, some one like Osborne, perhaps, rather than Osborne himself, for she shrank from giving a personal form and name to the hero that was to be. The squire was not unwise in wishing her well out of the house before Osborne came home, if he was considering her peace of mind. Yet, when she went away from the Hall he missed her constantly. It had been so pleasant to have her there, daily fulfilling all the pretty offices of a daughter, cheering the meals, so often tete-a-tete betwixt him and Roger, with her innocent wise questions, her lively interest in their talk, her merry replies to his banter. And Roger missed her too. Sometimes her remarks had probed into his mind, and excited him to the deep thought in which he delighted. At other times he had felt himself of real help to her in her hours of need, and in making her take an interest in books, which treated of higher things than the continual fiction and poetry which she had hitherto read. He felt something like an affectionate tutor who was suddenly deprived of his most promising pupil. He wondered how she would go on without him, whether she would be puzzled and disheartened by the books he had lent her to read, how she and her stepmother would get along together. She occupied his thoughts a good deal those first few days after she left the Hall. Mrs. Hamley regretted her more and longer than did the other two. She had given her the place of a daughter in her heart, and now she missed the sweet feminine companionship, the playful caresses, the never-ceasing attentions, the very need of sympathy in her sorrows, that Molly had shown so openly from time to time. All these things had extremely endeared her to the tender-hearted Mrs. Hamley. Molly, too, felt the change of atmosphere keenly, and she blamed herself for so feeling even more keenly still. But she could not help having a sense of refinement, which had made her appreciate the whole manner of being at the Hall. By her dear old friends the Miss Brownings she was petted and caressed so much that she became ashamed of noticing the coarser and louder tones in which they spoke, the provincialism of their pronunciation, the absence of interest in things, and their greediness of details about persons. They asked her questions which she was puzzled enough to answer about her future stepmother, her loyalty to her father forbidding her to reply fully and truthfully. She was always glad when they began to make inquiries as to every possible affair at the Hall. She had been so happy there. She liked them all, down to the very dogs, so thoroughly that it was easy work replying. She did not mind telling them everything, even to the style of Mrs. Hamley's invalid dress, nor what wine the squire drank at dinner. Indeed, talking about these things helped her to recall the happiest time in her life. But one evening, as they were all sitting together after tea in the little upstairs drawing-room, looking into the High Street, Molly discoursing away on the various pleasures of Hamley Hall, and just then telling of all Roger's wisdom in natural science, and some of the curiosities he had shown her, she was suddenly pulled up by this little speech. "You seem to have seen a great deal of Mr. Roger, Molly," said Miss Browning, in a way intended to convey a great deal of meaning to her sister, and none at all to Molly. But the man recovered of the bite, the dog it was that died. Molly was perfectly aware of Miss Browning's emphatic tone, though at first she was perplexed as to its cause, while Miss Phoebe was just then too much absorbed in knitting the heel of her stocking to be fully alive to her sister's nods and winks. "Yes, he was very kind to me," said Molly, slowly, pondering over Miss Browning's manner, and unwilling to say more until she had satisfied herself to what the question tended. "I dare say you will be soon going to Hamley Hall again. He is not the eldest son, you know, Phoebe. Don't make my head ache with your eternal 1819, but attend to the conversation. Molly is telling us how much she saw of Mr. Roger, and how kind he was to her. I've always heard he was a very nice young man, my dear. Tell us some more about him. Now, Phoebe, attend. How was he kind to you, Molly?" "Oh, he told me what books to read, and one day he made me notice how many bees I saw." "Bees, child? What do you mean? Either you or he must have been crazy." "No, not at all. There are more than 200 kinds of bees in England, and he wanted me to notice the difference between them and flies. Miss Browning, I can't help seeing what you fancy," said Molly, as red as fire, "but it is very wrong. It is all a mistake. I won't speak another word about Mr. Roger or Hamley at all, if it puts such silly notions into your head." "Highty-tighty! Here's a young lady to be lecturing her elders. Silly notions, indeed! They are in your head, it seems. And let me tell you, Molly, you are too young to let your mind be running on lovers." Molly had been once or twice called saucy and impertinent, and certainly a little sauciness came out now. "I never said what this silly notion was, Miss Browning, did I now, Miss Phoebe? Don't you see, dear Miss Phoebe, it is all her own interpretation, and according to her own fancy, this foolish talk about lovers?" Molly was flaming with indignation, but she had appealed to the wrong person for justice. Miss Phoebe tried to make peace after the fashion of weak-minded persons, who would cover over the unpleasant sight of a sore, instead of trying to heal it. "I'm sure I don't know anything about it, my dear. It seems to me that what Sally was saying is very true indeed, and I think, love, you misunderstood her, or perhaps she misunderstood you, or I may be misunderstanding it altogether, so we'd better not talk any more about it. What price did you say you were going to give for the drugget in Mr. Gibson's dining-room, sister?" So Miss Browning and Molly went on till evening, each chafed and angry with the other. They wished each other good night, going through the usual forms in the coolest manner possible. Molly went up to her little bedroom, clean and neat as a bedroom could be, with draperies of small delicate patchwork, bed curtains, window curtains, and counterpane, a japanned toilette table, full of little boxes, with a small looking-glass affixed to it, that distorted every face that was so unwise as to look in it. This room had been to the child one of the most dainty and luxurious places ever seen, in comparison with her own bare, white dimity bedroom, and now she was sleeping in it, as a guest, and all the quaint adornments she had once peeped at as a great favour, as they were carefully wrapped up in cap paper, were set out for her use. And yet how little she had deserved this hospitable care, how impertinent she had been, how cross she had felt ever since. She was crying tears of penitence and youthful misery when there came a low tap to the door. Molly opened it, and there stood Miss Browning, in a wonderful erection of a nightcap, and scantily attired in a coloured calico jacket over her scrimpy and short white petticoat. "I was afraid you were asleep, child," said she, coming in and shutting the door, "but I wanted to say to you what we've got wrong to-day somehow, and I think it was perhaps my doing. It's as well Phoebe shouldn't know, for she thinks me perfect, and when there's only two of us, we get along better if one of us thinks the other can do no wrong. But I rather think I was a little cross. We'll not say any more about it, Molly, only we'll go to sleep friends, and friends we'll always be, child, won't we? Now give me a kiss, and don't cry and swell your eyes up, and put out your candle carefully." "I was wrong. It was my fault," said Molly, kissing her. "Fiddlestick-ends, don't contradict me. I say it was my fault, and I won't hear another word about it." The next day Molly went with Miss Browning to see the changes going on in her father's house. To her they were but dismal improvements. The faint grey of the dining-room walls, which had harmonized well enough with the deep crimson of the moreen curtains, and which, when well cleaned, look thinly coated rather than dirty, was now exchanged for a pink salmon colour of a very glowing hue, and the new curtains were of that pale sea-green just coming into fashion. Very bright and pretty, Miss Browning called it, and in the first renewing of their love Molly could not bear to contradict her. She could only hope that the green and brown drugget would tone down the brightness and prettiness. There was scaffolding here, scaffolding there, and Betty scolding everywhere. "Come up now and see your papa's bedroom. He's sleeping upstairs in yours, that everything may be done up afresh in his." Molly could just remember, in faint clear lines of distinctness, being taken into this very room to bid farewell to her dying mother. She could see the white linen, the white muslin, surrounding the pale, wan, wistful face, with the large, longing eyes, yearning for one more touch of the little soft, warm child, whom she was too feeble to clasp in her arms, already growing numb in death. Many a time when Molly had been in this room since that sad day, had she seen in vivid fancy that same wan, wistful face lying on the pillow, the outline of the form beneath the clothes, and the girl had not shrunk from such visions, but rather cherished them, as preserving to her the remembrance of her mother's outward semblance. Her eyes were full of tears, as she followed Miss Browning into this room to see it under its new aspect. Nearly everything was changed, the position of the bed and the colour of the furniture. There was a grand toilette table now, with a glass upon it, instead of the primitive substitute of the top of a chest of drawers, with a mirror above on the wall sloping downwards. These latter things had served her mother during her short married life. "You see we must have all in order for a lady who has passed so much of her time in the Countess's mansion," said Miss Browning, who was now quite reconciled to the marriage, thanks to the pleasant employment of furnishing that had devolved upon her in consequence. "Cromer, the upholsterer, wanted to persuade me to have a sofa and a writing-table. These men will say anything is the fashion, if they want to sell an article. I said, 'No, no, Cromer, bedrooms are for sleeping in, and sitting-rooms are for sitting in. Keep everything to its right purpose, and don't try and delude me into nonsense.' Why, my mother would have given us a fine scolding if she had ever caught us in our bedrooms in the daytime. We kept our outdoor things in a closet downstairs, and there was a very tidy place for washing our hands, which is as much as one wants in the daytime. Stuffing up a bedroom with sofas and tables! I never heard of such a thing. Besides, £100 won't last for ever. I shan't be able to do anything for your room, Molly." "I'm right down glad of it," said Molly. "Nearly everything in it was what mamma had when she lived with my great-uncle. I wouldn't have had it changed for the world, I am so fond of it." "Well, there's no danger of it now the money is run out. By the way, Molly, who's to buy you a bridesmaid's dress?" "I don't know," said Molly. "I suppose I am to be a bridesmaid, but no one has spoken to me about my dress." "Then I shall ask your papa." "Please don't. He must have to spend a great deal of money just now. Besides, I would rather not be at the wedding, if they'll let me stay away." "Nonsense, child! Why, all the town would be talking of it. You must go, and you must be well dressed, for your father's sake." But Mr. Gibson had thought of Molly's dress, although he had said nothing about it to her. He had commissioned his future wife to get her what was requisite, and presently a very smart dressmaker came over from the county town to try on a dress, which was both so simple and so elegant as at once to charm Molly. When it came home all ready to put on, Molly had a private dressing up for the Miss Brownings' benefit, and she was almost startled when she looked into the glass and saw the improvement in her appearance. "I wonder if I'm pretty," thought she. "I almost think I am, in this kind of dress, I mean, of course. Betty would say, 'Fine feathers make fine birds.'" When she went downstairs in her bridal attire, and with shy blushes presented herself for inspection, she was greeted with a burst of admiration. "Well, upon my word, I shouldn't have known you." Fine feathers, thought Molly, and checked her rising vanity. "You are really beautiful, isn't she, sister?" said Miss Phoebe. "Why, my dear, if you were always dressed, you would be prettier than your dear mamma, whom we always reckoned so very personable." "You're not a bit like her. You favour your father, and white always sets off a brown complexion." "But isn't she beautiful?" persevered Miss Phoebe. "Well, and if she is, Providence made her, and not she herself. Besides, the dressmaker must go shares. What a fine India muslin it is! It'll have cost a pretty penny." Mr. Gibson and Molly drove over to Ashcombe, the night before the wedding, in the one yellow post-chaise that Hollingford possessed. They were to be Mr. Preston's, or rather my lord's, guests at the Manor House. The Manor House came up to its name, and delighted Molly at first sight. It was built of stone, had many gables and mullioned windows, and was covered over with Virginian creeper and late-blowing roses. Molly did not know Mr. Preston, who stood in the doorway to greet her father. She took standing with him as a young lady at once, and it was the first time she had met with the kind of behaviour, half complimentary, half flirting, which some men think it is necessary to assume with every woman under 25. Mr. Preston was very handsome, and knew it. He was a fair man, with light brown hair and whiskers, grey, roving, well-shaped eyes, with lashes darker than his hair, and a figure rendered easy and supple by the athletic exercises in which his excellence was famous, and which had procured him admission into much higher society than he was otherwise entitled to enter. He was a capital cricketer, was so good a shot that any house desirous of a reputation for its bags on the 12th or the 1st was glad to have him for a guest. He taught young ladies to play billiards on a wet day, or went in for the game in serious earnest when required. He knew half the private theatrical plays off by heart, and was invaluable in arranging impromptu charades and tableaux. He had his own private reasons for wishing to get up a flirtation with Molly just at this time. He had amused himself so much with the widow when she first came to Ashcombe, that he fancied that the sight of him, standing by her less polished, less handsome, middle-aged husband, might be too much of a contrast to be agreeable. Besides, he had really a strong passion for someone else, someone who would be absent, and that passion it was necessary for him to conceal. So that, altogether, he had resolved, even had the little Gibson girl, as he called her, been less attractive than she was, to devote himself to her for the next 16 hours. They were taken by their host into a wainscoted parlour, where a wood fire crackled and burnt, and the crimson curtains shut out the waning day and the outer chill. Here the table was laid for dinner, snowy table linen, bright silver, clear sparkling glass, wine, and an autumnal dessert on the sideboard. Yet Mr. Preston kept apologizing to Molly for the rudeness of his bachelor home, for the smallness of the room, the great dining-room being already appropriated by his housekeeper, in preparation for the morrow's breakfast. And then he rang for a servant to show Molly to her room. She was taken into a most comfortable chamber, a wood fire on the hearth, candles lighted on the toilette table, dark woolen curtains surrounding a snow-white bed, great vases of china standing here and there. "This is my Lady Harriet's room when her ladyship comes to the manor house with my lord the Earl," said the housemaid, striking out thousands of brilliant sparks by a well-directed blow at a smouldering log. "Shall I help you to dress, miss? I always help her ladyship." Molly, quite aware of the fact that she had but her white muslin gown for the wedding besides that she had on, dismissed the good woman, and was thankful to be left to herself. Dinner, was it called? Why, it was nearly 8 o'clock, and preparations for bed seemed a more natural employment than dressing at this hour of night. All the dressing she could manage was the placing of a red damask rose or two in the band of her grey stuff gown, there being a great nosegay of choice autumnal flowers on the toilette table. She did try the effect of another crimson rose in her black hair, just above her ear. It was very pretty, but too coquettish, and so she put it back again. The dark oak panels and wainscoting of the whole house seemed to glow in warm light. There were so many fires in different rooms, in the hall, and even one on the landing of the staircase. Mr. Preston must have heard her step, for he met her in the hall, and led her into a small drawing-room, with closed folding doors on one side, opening into the larger drawing-room, as he told her. This room into which she entered reminded her a little of Hamley, yellow satin upholstery of 70 or 100 years ago, all delicately kept and scrupulously clean, great Indian cabinets and china jars, emitting spicy odors, a large blazing fire, before which her father stood in his morning dress, grave and thoughtful, as he had been all day. "This room is that which Lady Harrison uses when she comes here with her father for a day or two," said Mr. Preston, and Molly tried to save her father by being ready to talk herself. "Does she often come here?" "Not often, but I fancy she likes being here when she does. Perhaps she finds it an agreeable change after the more formal life she leads at the Towers." "I should think it was a very pleasant house to stay at," said Molly, remembering the look of warm comfort that pervaded it. But a little to her dismay, Mr. Preston seemed to take it as a compliment to himself. "I was afraid a young lady like you might perceive all the incongruities of a bachelor's home. I am very much obliged to you, Miss Gibson. In general, I live pretty much in the room in which we shall dine, and I have a sort of agent's office in which I keep books and papers and receive callers on business." Then they went in to dinner. Molly thought everything that was served was delicious, and cooked to the point of perfection, but they did not seem to satisfy Mr. Preston, who apologized to his guests several times for the bad cooking of this dish, or the omission of a particular sauce to that, always referring to bachelor's housekeeping, bachelor's this, and bachelor's that, till Molly grew quite impatient at the word. Her father's depression, which was still continuing and rendering him very silent, made her uneasy, yet she wished to conceal it from Mr. Preston, and so she talked away, trying to obviate the sort of personal bearing which their host would give to everything. She did not know when to leave the gentleman, but her father made a sign to her, and she was conducted back to the yellow drawing-room by Mr. Preston, who made many apologies for leaving her there. She enjoyed herself extremely, however, feeling at liberty to prowl about, and examine all the curiosities the room contained. Among other things was a Louis XV cabinet, with lovely miniatures in enamel let into the fine woodwork. She carried a candle to it, and was looking intently at these faces when her father and Mr. Preston came in. Her father looked still careworn and anxious. He came up and patted her on the back, looked at what she was looking at, and then went off to silence and the fire. Mr. Preston took the candle out of her hand and threw himself into her interests with an air of ready gallantry. "That is said to be Mademoiselle de Saint-Quentin, a great beauty at the French court. This is Madame du Barry. Do you see any likeness in Mademoiselle de Saint-Quentin to anyone you know?" He had lowered his voice a little as he asked this question. "No," said Molly, looking at it again. "I never saw anyone half so beautiful." "But don't you see a likeness, in the eyes particularly?" he asked again, with some impatience. Molly tried hard to find out a resemblance, and was again unsuccessful. It constantly reminds me of Miss Kirkpatrick."
"Does it?" said Molly, eagerly. "Oh, I am so glad! I've never seen her, so of course I couldn't find out the likeness. You know her then, do you? Please tell me all about her."
He hesitated a moment before speaking. He smiled a little before replying. "She's very beautiful. That of course is understood when I say that this miniature does not come up to her for beauty."
"And besides? Go on, please."
"What do you mean by besides?"
"Oh, I suppose she's very clever and accomplished?"
That was not in the least what Molly wanted to ask, but it was difficult to word the vague vastness of her unspoken inquiry. "She is clever, naturally. She has picked up accomplishments. But she has such a charm about her. One forgets what she herself is in the halo that surrounds her. You ask me all this, Miss Gibson, and I answer truthfully, or else I should not entertain one young lady with my enthusiastic praises of another."
"I don't see why not," said Molly. "Besides, if you wouldn't do it in general, I think you ought to do it in my case. For you, perhaps, don't know, but she is coming to live with us when she leaves school, and we are very nearly the same age, so it will be almost like having a sister."
"She is to live with you, is she?" said Mr. Preston, to whom this intelligence was news. "And when is she to leave school? I thought she would surely have been at this wedding, but I was told she was not to come. When is she to leave school?"
"I think it is to be at Easter. You know she's at Bologna, and it's a long journey for her to come alone, or else papa wished for her to be at the marriage very much indeed."
"And her mother prevented it? I understand."
"No, it wasn't her mother. It was the French schoolmistress, who didn't think it desirable."
"It comes to pretty much the same thing. And she's to return and live with you after Easter."
"I believe so. Is she a grave or a merry person?"
"Never very grave as far as I have seen of her. Sparkling would be the word for her, I think. Do you ever write to her? If you do, pray remember me to her, and tell her how we have been talking about her, you and I."
"I never write to her," said Molly, rather shortly. Tea came in, and after that they all went to bed. Molly heard her father exclaim at the fire in his bedroom, and Mr. Preston's reply.
"I pique myself on my keen relish for all creature comforts, and also on my power of doing without them, if need be. My lord's woods are ample, and I indulge myself with a fire in my bedroom for 9 months of the year. Yet I could travel in Iceland without wincing from the cold."
End of chapter 13. Is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rachel Ellen. Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. Chapter 14. Molly finds herself patronized. The wedding went off much as such affairs do. Lord Cumnor and Lady Harriet drove over from the Towers, so the hour for the ceremony was as late as possible. Lord Cumnor came over to officiate as the bride's father, and was in more open glee than either bride or bridegroom, or anyone else. Lady Harriet came as a sort of amateur bridesmaid, to "share Molly's duties," as she called it. They went from the manor house in 2 carriages to the church in the park, Mr. Preston and Mr. Gibson in one, and Molly, to her dismay, shut up with Lord Cumnor and Lady Harriet in the other. Lady Harriet's gown of white muslin had seen 1 or 2 garden parties, and was not in the freshest order. It had been rather a freak of the young ladies at the last moment. She was very merry, and very much inclined to talk to Molly by way of finding out what sort of a little personage Clare was to have for her future daughter. She began. "We mustn't crush this pretty muslin dress of yours. Put it over papa's knee. He doesn't mind in the least."
"What, my dear, a white dress? No, to be sure not. I rather like it. Besides, going to a wedding, who minds anything? It would be different if we were going to a funeral." Molly conscientiously strove to find out the meaning of this speech, but before she had done so, Lady Harriet spoke again, going to the point, as she always piqued herself on doing. "I dare say it's something of a trial to you, this second marriage of your father's, but you'll find Clare the most amiable of women. She always let me have my own way, and I've no doubt she'll let you have yours." "I mean to try and like her," said Molly, in a low voice, trying hard to keep down the tears that would keep rising to her eyes this morning. "I've seen very little of her yet."
"Why, it's the best thing for you that could have happened, my dear," said Lord Cumnor. "You're growing up into a young lady, and a very pretty young lady too, if you'll allow an old man to say so, and who's so proper as your father's wife to bring you out, and show you off, and take you to balls, and that kind of thing. I always said this match that is going to come off today was the most suitable thing I ever knew, and it's even a better thing for you than for the people themselves."
"Poor child," said Lady Harriet, who had caught a sight of Molly's troubled face. "The thought of balls is too much for her just now, but you'll like having Cynthia Kirkpatrick for a companion, shan't you, dear?" "Very much," said Molly, cheering up a little. "Do you know her?" "Oh, I've seen her over and over again when she was a little girl, and once or twice since. She's the prettiest creature that you ever saw, and with eyes that mean mischief, if I'm not mistaken. But Clare kept her spirit under pretty well when she was staying with us, afraid of her being troublesome, I fancy." Before Molly could shape her next question, they were at the church, and she and Lady Harriet went into a pew near the door to wait for the bride, in whose train they were to proceed to the altar. The Earl drove on alone to fetch her from her own house, not a quarter of a mile distant. It was pleasant to her to be led to the hymeneal altar by a belted earl, and pleasant to have his daughter as a volunteered bridesmaid. Mrs. Kirkpatrick, in this flush of small gratifications, and on the brink of matrimony with the man whom she liked, and who would be bound to support her without any exertion of her own, looked beamingly happy and handsome. A little cloud came over her face at the sight of Mr. Preston. The sweet perpetuity of her smile was rather disturbed as he followed in Mr. Gibson's wake. But his face never changed. He bowed to her gravely, and then seemed absorbed in the service. 10 minutes, and all was over. The bride and bridegroom were driving together to the manor house. Mr. Preston was walking thither by a short cut, and Molly was again in the carriage with my lord, rubbing his hands and chuckling, and Lady Harriet, trying to be kind and consolatory, when her silence would have been the best comfort. Molly found out, to her dismay, that the plan was for her to return with Lord Cumnor and Lady Harriet when they went back to the Towers in the evening. In the meantime, Lord Cumnor had business to do with Mr. Preston, and after the happy couple had driven off on their week's holiday tour, she was to be left alone with the formidable Lady Harriet. When they were by themselves, after all the others had been thus disposed of, Lady Harriet sat still over the drawing-room fire, holding a screen between it and her face, but gazing intently at Molly for a minute or two. Molly was fully conscious of this prolonged look, and was trying to get up her courage to return the stare, when Lady Harriet suddenly said, "I like you. You are a little wild creature, and I want to tame you. Come here, and sit on this stool by me. What is your name, or what do they call you, as north country people would express it?" "Molly Gibson. My real name is Mary." "Molly is a nice, soft-sounding name. People in the last century weren't afraid of homely names. Now we are all so smart and fine. No more Lady Bettys now. I almost wonder they haven't rechristened all the worsted and knitting cotton that bears her name. Fancy Lady Constantia's cotton, or Lady Anna Maria's worsted." "I didn't know there was a Lady Betty's cotton," said Molly. "That proves you don't do fancy work. You'll find Clare will set you to it, though. She used to set me at piece after piece, knights kneeling to ladies, impossible flowers, but I must do her the justice to add that when I got tired of them, she finished them herself. I wonder how you'll get on together." "So do I," sighed out Molly, under her breath. "I used to think that I managed her, till one day an uncomfortable suspicion arose that all the time she had been managing me. Still, it's easy work to let oneself be managed, at any rate till one wakens up to the consciousness of the process, and then it may become amusing, if one takes it in that light." "I should hate to be managed," said Molly, indignantly. "I'll try and do what she wishes for papa's sake, if she'll only tell me outright, but I should dislike to be trapped into anything." "Now I," said Lady Harriet, "am too lazy to avoid traps, and I rather like to remark the cleverness with which they're set. But then of course I know that, if I choose to exert myself, I can break through the withes of green flax with which they try to bind me. Now perhaps you won't be able." "I don't quite understand what you mean," said Molly. "Oh, well, never mind. I dare say it's as well for you that you shouldn't. The moral of all I have been saying is, be a good girl, and suffer yourself to be led, and you'll find your new stepmother the sweetest creature imaginable. You'll get on capitally with her, I make no doubt. How you'll get on with her daughter is another affair, but I dare say very well. Now we'll ring for tea, for I suppose that heavy breakfast is to stand for our lunch." Mr. Preston came into the room just at this time, and Molly was a little surprised at Lady Harriet's cool manner of dismissing him, remembering as she did how Mr. Preston had implied his intimacy with her ladyship the evening before at dinner-time. "I cannot bear that sort of person," said Lady Harriet, almost before he was out of hearing, "giving himself airs of gallantry toward one to whom his simple respect is all his duty. I can talk to one of my father's labourers with pleasure, while with a man like that underbred fop I am all over thorns and nettles. What is it the Irish call that style of creature? They've got some capital word for it, I know. What is it?" "I don't know. I never heard it," said Molly, a little ashamed of her ignorance. "Oh, that shows you've never read Miss Edgeworth's tales. Now, have you? If you had, you'd have recollected that there was such a word, even if you didn't remember what it was. If you've never read those stories, they would be just the thing to beguile your solitude. Vastly improving and moral, and yet quite sufficiently interesting. I'll lend them to you while you're all alone." "I'm not alone. I'm not at home, but on a visit to the Miss Brownings." "Then I'll bring them to you. I know the Miss Brownings. They used to come regularly on the school day to the Towers. Pecksy and Flapsy I used to call them. I like the Miss Brownings. One gets enough of respect from them at any rate, and I've always wanted to see the kind of menage of such people. I'll bring you a whole pile of Miss Edgeworth's stories, my dear." Molly sat quite silent for a minute or two. Then she mustered up courage to speak out what was in her mind. "Your ladyship," the title was the first fruits of the lesson, as Molly took it, on paying due respect, "your ladyship keeps speaking of the class of people to which I belong, as if it was a kind of strange animal you were talking about. Yet you talk so openly to me that—" "Well, go on, I like to hear you." Still silence. "You think me in your heart a little impertinent, now don't you?" said Lady Harriet, almost kindly. Molly held her peace for 2 or 3 moments, then she lifted her beautiful, honest eyes to Lady Harriet's face and said, "Yes, a little. But I think you a great many other things." "We'll leave the other things for the present. Don't you see, little one, I talked after my kind, just as you talk after your kind. It's only on the surface with both of us. Why, I dare say some of your good Hollingford ladies talk of the poor people in a manner which they would consider as impertinent in their turn, if they could hear it. But I ought to be more considerate when I remember how often my blood has boiled at the modes of speech and behaviour of one of my aunts, mamma's sister, no, I won't name names. Anyone who earns his livelihood by an exercise of head or hands, or from professional people and rich merchants down to labourers, she calls persons. She would never in her most slip-slop talk accord them even the conventional title of gentlemen, and the way in which she takes possession of human beings, my woman, my people. But, after all, it is only a way of speaking. I ought not to have used it to you, but somehow I separate you from all these Hollingford people." "But why?" persevered Molly. "I'm one of them." "Yes, you are. But Now don't reprove me again for impertinence. Most of them are so unnatural in their exaggerated respect and admiration when they come up to the Towers, and put on so much pretence by way of fine manners, that they only make themselves objects of ridicule. You, at least, are simple and truthful, and that's why I separate you in my own mind from them, and have talked unconsciously to you as I would— well, now here's another piece of impertinence, as I would to my equal, in rank I mean, for I don't set myself up in solid things as any better than my neighbours. Here's tea, however, come in time to stop me from growing too humble." It was a very pleasant little tea in the fading September twilight. Just as it was ended, in came Mr. Preston again. "Lady Harriet, will you allow me the pleasure of showing you some alterations I have made in the flower garden, in which I have tried to consult your taste, before it grows dark?" "Thank you, Mr. Preston. I will ride over with papa some day, and we will see if we approve of them."
Mr. Preston's brow flushed, but he affected not to perceive Lady Harriet's haughtiness, and, turning to Molly, he said, "Will you not come out, Miss Gibson, and see something of the gardens? You haven't been out at all, I think, excepting to church."
Molly did not like the idea of going out for a tete-a-tete walk with Mr. Preston, yet she pined for a little fresh air, would have liked to have seen the gardens, and have looked at the manor house from different aspects, and, besides this, much as she recoiled from Mr. Preston, she felt sorry for him under the repulse he had just received. While she was hesitating, and slowly tending towards consent, Lady Harriet spoke. "I cannot spare Miss Gibson. If she would like to see the place, I will bring her over some day myself."
When he had left the room, Lady Harriet said,
"I dare say it's my own lazy selfishness has kept you indoors all day against your will, but at any rate, you are not to go out walking with that man. I've an instinctive aversion to him. Not entirely instinctive either, it has some foundation in fact, and I desire you don't allow him ever to get intimate with you. He is a very clever land agent, and does his duty by papa, and I don't choose to be taken up for libel, but remember what I say."
Then the carriage came round, and after numberless last words from the Earl, who appeared to have put off every possible direction to the moment when he stood, like an awkward Mercury, balancing himself on the step of the carriage, they drove back to the Towers.
"Would you rather come in and dine with us? We should send you home, of course, or go home straight?" asked Lady Harriet of Molly. She and her father had both been sleeping till they drew up at the bottom of the flight of steps. "Tell the truth, now and evermore. Truth is generally amusing, if it's nothing else." "I would rather go back to Miss Brownings at once, please," said Molly, with a nightmare-like recollection of the last, the only evening she had spent at the Towers. Lord Cumnor was standing on the steps, waiting to hand his daughter out of the carriage. Lady Harriet stopped to kiss Molly on the forehead, and to say, "I shall come some day soon, and bring you a load of Miss Edgeworth's tales, and make further acquaintance with Pecksy and Flapsy." "No, don't, please," said Molly, taking hold of her to detain her. "You must not come. Indeed, you must not." "Why not?" "Because I would rather not. Because I think that I ought not to have any one coming to see me who laughs at the friends I am staying with, and calls them names." Molly's heart beat very fast, but she meant every word that she said. "My dear little woman," said Lady Harriet, bending over her and speaking quite gravely, "I'm very sorry to have called them names, very, very sorry to have hurt you. If I promise you to be respectful to them in word and deed, and in very thought if I can, you'll let me then, won't you?" Molly hesitated. "I'd better go home at once. I shall only say wrong things, and there's Lord Cumnor waiting all this time." "Let him alone. He's very well amused hearing all the news of the day from Brown. Then I shall come, under promise." So Molly drove off in solitary grandeur, and Miss Brownings' knocker was loosened on its venerable hinges by the never-ending peal of Lord Cumnor's footmen. They were full of welcome, full of curiosity. All through the long day they had been missing their bright young visitor, and 3 or 4 times in every hour they had been wondering and settling what everybody was doing at that exact minute. What had become of Molly during all the afternoon had been a great perplexity to them, and they were very much oppressed with the sense of the great honour she had received in being allowed to spend so many hours tete-a-tete with Lady Harriet. They were, indeed, more excited by this one fact than by all the details of the wedding, most of which they had known of beforehand, and talked over with much perseverance during the day. Molly began to feel as if there was some foundation for Lady Harriet's inclination to ridicule the worship paid by the good people of Hollingford to their liege lords, and to wonder with what tokens of reverence they would receive Lady Harriet if she came to pay her promised visit. She had never thought of concealing the probability of this call until this evening, but now she felt as if it would be better not to speak of the chance, as she was not at all sure if the promise would be fulfilled. Before Lady Harriet's call was paid, Molly received another visit. Roger Hamley came riding over one day with a note from his mother, and a wasp's nest as a present from himself. Molly heard his powerful voice come sounding up the little staircase, as he asked if Miss Gibson was at home, from the servant-maid at the door, and she was half amused and half annoyed as she thought how this call of his would give colour to Miss Brownings' fancies. "I would rather never be married at all," thought she, "than marry an ugly man, and dear good Mr. Roger is really ugly. I don't think one could even call him plain." Yet the Miss Brownings, who did not look upon young men as if their natural costume was a helmet and a suit of armour, thought Mr. Roger Hamley a very personable young fellow, as he came into the room, his face flushed with exercise, his white teeth showing pleasantly in the courteous bow and smile he gave to all around. He knew the Miss Brownings slightly, and talked pleasantly to them, while Molly read Mrs. Hamley's little missive of sympathy and good wishes relating to the wedding. Then he turned to her, and though the Miss Brownings listened with all their ears, they could not find out anything remarkable either in the words he said, or the tone in which they were spoken. "I've brought you the wasp's nest I promised you, Miss Gibson. There has been no lack of such things this year. We've taken 74 on my father's land alone, and one of the labourers, a poor fellow who ekes out his wages by bee-keeping, has had a sad misfortune. The wasps have turned the bees out of his 7 hives, taken possession, and eaten up the honey." "What greedy little vermin!" said Miss Browning. Molly saw Roger's eyes twinkle at the misapplication of the word, but though he had a strong sense of humour, it never appeared to diminish his respect for the people who amused him. "I'm sure they deserve fire and brimstone more than the poor dear innocent bees," said Miss Phoebe, "and then it seems so ungrateful of mankind, who are going to feast on the honey." She sighed over the thought, as if it was too much for her. While Molly finished reading her note, he explained its contents to Miss Browning. "My brother and I are going with my father to an agricultural meeting at Canonbury on Thursday, and my mother desired me to say to you how very much obliged to you she should be if you would spare her Miss Gibson for the day. She was very anxious to ask for the pleasure of your company too, but she really is so poorly that we persuaded her to be content with Miss Gibson, as she wouldn't scruple leaving a young lady to amuse herself, which she would be unwilling to do if you and your sister were there." "I'm sure she's very kind, very. Nothing would have given us more pleasure," said Miss Browning, drawing herself up in gratified dignity. "Oh, yes, we quite understand, Mr. Roger, and we fully recognize Mrs. Hamley's kind intentions. We will take the will for the deed, as the common people express it. I believe that there was an intermarriage between the Brownings and the Hamleys a generation or 2 ago." "I dare say there was," said Roger. "My mother is very delicate, and obliged to humour her health, which has made her keep aloof from society." "Then may I go?" said Molly, sparkling with the idea of seeing her dear Mrs. Hamley again, yet afraid of appearing too desirous of leaving her kind old friends. "To be sure, my dear. Write a pretty note, and tell Mrs. Hamley how much obliged to her we are for thinking of us." "I'm afraid I can't wait for a note," said Roger. "I must take a message instead, for I have to meet my father at 1 o'clock, and it's close upon it now." When he was gone, Molly felt so light-hearted at the thoughts of Thursday that she could hardly attend to what the Miss Brownings were saying. One was talking about the pretty muslin gown which Molly had sent to the wash only that morning, and contriving how it could be had back again in time for Molly to wear, and the other, Miss Phoebe, totally inattentive to her sister's speaking for a wonder, was piping out a separate strain of her own, and singing Roger Hamley's praises. "Such a fine-looking young man, and so courteous and affable, like the young men of our youth, now, is he not, sister? And yet they all say Mr. Osborne is the handsomest. What do you think, child?"
"I've never seen Mr. Osborne," said Molly, blushing, and hating herself for doing so. Why was it? She had never seen him, as she said. It was only that her fancy had dwelt on him so much. He was gone. All the gentlemen were gone before the carriage, which came to fetch Molly on Thursday, reached Hamley Hall. But Molly was almost glad. She was so much afraid of being disappointed. Besides, she had her dear Mrs. Hamley the more to herself, the quiet sit in the morning-room, talking poetry and romance, the midday saunter into the garden, brilliant with autumnal flowers, and glittering dewdrops on the gossamer webs that stretched from scarlet to blue, and thence to purple and yellow petals. As they were sitting at lunch, a strange man's voice and step were heard in the hall. The door was opened, and a young man came in who could be no other than Osborne. He was beautiful and languid-looking, almost as frail in appearance as his mother, whom he strongly resembled. This seeming delicacy made him appear older than he was. He was dressed to perfection, and yet with easy carelessness. He came up to his mother, and stood by her, holding her hand, while his eyes sought Molly, not boldly or impertinently, but as if appraising her critically.
"Yes, I'm back again. Bullocks, I find, are not in my line. I only disappointed my father in not being able to appreciate their merits, and I'm afraid I didn't care to learn. And the smell was insufferable on such a hot day."
"My dear boy, don't make apologies to me. Keep them for your father. I'm only too glad to have you back. Miss Gibson, this tall fellow is my son Osborne, as I dare say you have guessed. Osborne, Miss Gibson. Now, what will you have?" He looked round the table as he sat down.
"Nothing here," said he. "Is there not some cold game pie? I'll ring for that."
Molly was trying to reconcile the ideal with the real. The ideal was agile yet powerful, with Greek features and an eagle eye, capable of enduring long fasting, and indifferent as to what he ate. The real was almost effeminate in movement, though not in figure. He had the Greek features, but his blue eyes had a cold, weary expression in them. He was dainty in eating, and had anything but a Homeric appetite. However, Molly's hero was not to eat more than Ivanhoe, when he was Friar Tuck's guest, and after all, with a little alteration, she began to think Mr. Osborne Hamley might turn out a poetical, if not a chivalrous, hero. He was extremely attentive to his mother, which pleased Molly, and in return, Mrs. Hamley seemed charmed with him to such a degree that Molly, once or twice, fancied that mother and son would have been happier in her absence. Yet again it struck on the shrewd, if simple girl, that Osborne was mentally squinting at her in the conversation which was directed to his mother. There were little turns and fioriture of speech, which Molly could not help feeling were graceful antics of language not common in the simple daily intercourse between mother and son. But it was flattering rather than otherwise to perceive that a very fine young man, who was a poet to boot, should think it worth while to talk on the tightrope for her benefit. And before the afternoon was ended, without there having been any direct conversation between Osborne and Molly, she had reinstated him on his throne in her imagination. Indeed, she had almost felt herself disloyal to her dear Mrs. Hamley when, in the first hour after her introduction, she had questioned his claims on his mother's idolatry. His beauty came out more and more as he became animated in some discussion with her, and all his attitudes, if a little studied, were graceful in the extreme. Before Molly left, the squire and Roger returned from Canonbury.
"Osborne here?" said the squire, red and panting. Why the deuce couldn't you tell us you were coming home? I looked about for you everywhere, just as we were going into the ordinary. I wanted to introduce you to Grantley, and Fawkes, and Lord Forest, men from the other side of the county, whom you ought to know, and Roger there missed above half his dinner hunting about for you, and all the time you'd stole away and were quietly sitting here with the women. I wish you'd let me know the next time you make off. I've lost half my pleasure in looking at as fine a lot of cattle as I ever saw, with thinking you might be having one of your old attacks of faintness. I should have had one, I think, if I'd stayed longer in that atmosphere, but I'm sorry if I've caused you anxiety. Well, well, said the squire, somewhat mollified, and Roger too. There I've been sending him here and sending him there all the afternoon.
I didn't mind it, sir. I was only sorry you were so uneasy. I thought Osborne had gone home, for I knew it wasn't much in his way, said Roger. Molly intercepted a glance between the two brothers, a look of true confidence and love, which suddenly made her like them both, under the aspect of relationship, new to her observation. Roger came up to her, and sat down by her. "Well, and how are you getting on with Huber? Don't you find him very interesting?" "I'm afraid," said Molly, penitently, "I haven't read much. The Miss Brownings like me to talk, and besides, there is so much to do at home before papa comes back, and Miss Browning doesn't like me to go without her. I know it sounds nothing, but it does take up a great deal of time."
"When is your father coming back?"
"Next Tuesday, I believe. He cannot stay long away."
"I shall ride over and pay my respects to Mrs. Gibson," said he. "I shall come as soon as I may. Your father has been a very kind friend to me ever since I was a boy, and when I come, I shall expect my pupil to have been very diligent," he concluded, smiling his kind, pleasant smile at idle Molly.
Then the carriage came round, and she had the long solitary drive back to Miss Brownings'. It was dark out of doors when she got there, but Miss Phoebe was standing on the stairs, with a lighted candle in her hand, peering into the darkness to see Molly come in.
"Oh, Molly, I thought you'd never come back. Such a piece of news! Sister has gone to bed. She's had a headache with the excitement, I think, but she says it's new bread. Come upstairs softly, my dear, and I'll tell you what it is. Who do you think has been here? Drinking tea with us, too, in the most condescending manner."
"Lady Harriet?" said Molly, suddenly enlightened by the word condescending.
"Yes. Why, how did you guess it? But after all, her call, at any rate in the first instance, was upon you. Oh, dear Molly, if you're not in a hurry to go to bed, let me sit down quietly and tell you all about it, for my heart jumps into my mouth still when I think of how I was caught. She, that is her ladyship, left the carriage at the George, and took to her feet to go shopping, just as you or I may have done many a time in our lives. And sister was taking her 40 winks, and I was sitting with my gown up above my knees and my feet on the fender, pulling out my grandmother's lace which I'd been washing. The worst has yet to be told. I'd taken off my cap, for I thought it was getting dusk and no one would come, and there was I in my black silk skull-cap, when Nancy put her head in and whispered, 'There's a lady downstairs, a real grand one by her talk,' and in there came my Lady Harriet, so sweet and pretty in her ways, it was some time before I remembered I had never a cap on. Sister never wakened, or never roused up, so to say. She says she thought it was Nancy bringing in the tea when she heard some one moving, for her ladyship, as soon as she saw the state of the case, came and knelt down on the rug by me, and begged my pardon so prettily for having followed Nancy upstairs without waiting for permission, and was so taken by my old lace, and wanting to know how I washed it, and where you were, and when you'd be back, and when the happy couple would be back, till sister wakened. She's always a little bit put out, you know, when she first wakens from her afternoon nap, and without turning her head to see who it was, she said, quite sharp, 'Buzz, buzz, buzz, when will you learn that whispering is more fidgeting than talking out loud? I've not been able to sleep at all for the chatter you and Nancy have been keeping up all this time. You know that was a little fancy of sister's, for she'd been snoring away as naturally as could be.' So I went to her, and leaned over her, and said in a low voice, 'Sister, it's her ladyship and me that has been conversing.' Ladyship here, ladyship there. Have you lost your wits, Phoebe, that you talk such nonsense, and in your skull-cap too?"
By this time she was sitting up, and looking round her she saw Lady Harriet, in her velvets and silks, sitting on our rug, smiling, her bonnet off, and her pretty hair all bright with the blaze of the fire. My word! Sister was up on her feet directly, and she dropped her curtsy, and made her excuses for sleeping, as fast as might be, while I went off to put on my best cap, for sister might well say I was out of my wits to go on chatting to an earl's daughter, in an old black silk skull-cap. Black silk, too, when if I'd only known she was coming, I might have put on my new brown silk one, lying idle in my top drawer. And when I came back, sister was ordering tea for her ladyship, our tea, I mean. So I took my turn at talk, and sister slipped out to put on her Sunday silk. But I don't think we were quite so much at our ease with her ladyship as when I sat pulling out my lace in my skull-cap. And she was quite struck with our tea, and asked where we got it, for she never had tasted any like it before, and I told her we gave only 3 shillings 4 pence a pound for it, at Johnson's. Sister says I ought to have told her the price of our company tea, which is 5 shillings a pound, only that was not what we were drinking, for, as ill luck would have it, we'd none of it in the house. And she said she would send us some of hers, all the way from Russia, or Prussia, or some out-of-the-way place, and we were to compare, and see which we liked best, and if we liked hers best, she could get it for us at 3 shillings a pound. And she left her love for you, and though she was going away, you were not to forget her. Sister thought such a message would set you up too much, and told me she would not be chargeable for giving it you. But, I said, a message is a message, and it's on Molly's own shoulders if she's set up by it. Let us show her an example of humility, sister, though we have been sitting cheek by jowl in such company. So sister humphed, and said she'd a headache, and went to bed. And now you may tell me your news, my dear. So Molly told her small events, which, interesting as they might have been at other times to the gossip-loving and sympathetic Miss Phoebe, were rather pale in the stronger light reflected from the visit of an earl's daughter. End of chapter 14.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Kara Schallenberg. Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. Chapter 15. The New Mamma. On Tuesday afternoon Molly returned home, to the home which was already strange, and what Warwickshire people would call unked to her. New paint, new paper, new colours, grim servants dressed in their best, and objecting to every change, from their master's marriage to the new oilcloth in the hall, which tripped 'em up and threw 'em down, and was cold to the feet, and smelt just abominable. All these complaints Molly had to listen to, and it was not a cheerful preparation for the reception which she already felt to be so formidable. The sound of their carriage wheels was heard at last, and Molly went to the front door to meet them. Her father got out first, and took her hand and held it while he helped his bride to alight. Then he kissed her fondly, and passed her on to his wife, but her veil was so securely and becomingly fastened down, that it was some time before Mrs. Gibson could get her lips clear to greet her new daughter. Then there was luggage to be seen about, and both the travellers were occupied in this while Molly stood by, trembling with excitement, unable to help, and only conscious of Betty's rather cross looks, as heavy box after heavy box jammed up the passage. "Molly, my dear, show your mamma to her room." Mr. Gibson had hesitated, because the question of the name by which Molly was to call her new relation had never occurred to him before. The colour flashed into Molly's face. Was she to call her mamma, the name long appropriated in her mind to some one else, to her own dead mother? The rebellious heart rose against it, but she said nothing. She led the way upstairs, Mrs. Gibson turning round from time to time with some fresh direction as to which bag or trunk she needed most. She hardly spoke to Molly till they were both in the newly furnished bedroom, where a small fire had been lighted by Molly's orders. "Now, my love, we can embrace each other in peace. Oh dear, how tired I am!" after the embrace had been accomplished. "My spirits are so easily affected with fatigue, but your dear papa has been kindness itself. Dear, what an old-fashioned bed, and what a... But it doesn't signify. By and by we'll renovate the house, won't we, my dear? And you'll be my little maid to-night, and help me to arrange a few things, for I'm just worn out with the day's journey." "I've ordered a sort of tea-dinner to be ready for you," said Molly. "Shall I go and tell them to send it in?" "I'm not sure if I can go down again to-night. It would be very comfortable to have a little table brought in here, and sit in my dressing-gown by this cheerful fire. But to be sure, there's your dear papa. I really don't think he would eat anything if I were not there. One must not think about oneself, you know. Yes, I'll come down in a quarter of an hour." But Mr. Gibson had found a note awaiting him, with an immediate summons to an old patient, dangerously ill, and, snatching a mouthful of food while his horse was being saddled, he had to resume at once his old habits of attention to his profession above everything. As soon as Mrs. Gibson found that he was not likely to miss her presence, he had eaten a very tolerable lunch of bread and cold meat in solitude, so her fears about his appetite in her absence were not well founded. She desired to have her meal upstairs in her own room, and poor Molly, not daring to tell the servants of this whim, had to carry up first a table, which, however small, was too heavy for her, and afterwards all the choice portions of the meal, which she had taken great pains to arrange on the table, as she had seen such things done at Hamley, intermixed with fruit and flowers that had that morning been sent in from various great houses where Mr. Gibson was respected and valued. How pretty Molly had thought her handiwork an hour or two before! How dreary it seemed as, at last released from Mrs. Gibson's conversation, she sat down in solitude to cold tea and the drumsticks of the chicken. No one to look at her preparations and admire her left-handedness and taste. She had thought that her father would be gratified by it, and then he had never seen it. She had meant her cares as an offering of goodwill to her stepmother, who even now was ringing her bell to have the tray taken away, and Miss Gibson summoned to her bedroom. Molly hastily finished her meal and went upstairs again. "I feel so lonely, darling, in this strange house. Do come and be with me, and help me to unpack. I think your dear papa might have put off his visit to Mr. Craven-Smith for just this one evening." "Mr. Craven-Smith couldn't put off his dying," said Molly, bluntly. "You droll girl," said Mrs. Gibson, with a faint laugh. "But if this Mr. Smith is dying, as you say, what's the use of your father's going off to him in such a hurry? Does he expect any legacy, or anything of that kind?" Molly bit her lips to prevent herself from saying something disagreeable. She only answered, "I don't quite know that he is dying. The man said so, and papa can sometimes do something to make the last struggle easier. At any rate, it's always a comfort to the family to have him." "What dreary knowledge of death you have learned for a girl of your age! Really, if I had heard all these details of your father's profession, I doubt if I could have brought myself to have him." "He doesn't make the illness or the death. He does his best against them. I call it a very fine thing to think of what he does or tries to do. And you will think so too, when you see how he is watched for, and how people welcome him." "Well, don't let us talk any more of such gloomy things to-night. I think I shall go to bed at once. I am so tired. If you will only sit by me till I get sleepy, darling. If you will talk to me, the sound of your voice will soon send me off." Molly got a book and read her stepmother to sleep, preferring that to the harder task of keeping up a continual murmur of speech. Then she stole down and went into the dining-room, where the fire was gone out, purposely neglected by the servants to mark their displeasure at their new mistress's having had her tea in her own room. Molly managed to light it, however, before her father came home, and collected and rearranged some comfortable food for him. Then she knelt down again on the hearth-rug, gazing into the fire in a dreamy reverie, which had enough of sadness about it to cause the tears to drop unnoticed from her eyes. But she jumped up and shook herself into brightness at the sound of her father's step. "How is Mr. Craven Smith?" said she. "Dead. He just recognized me. He was one of my first patients on coming to Hollingford." Mr. Gibson sat down in the armchair made ready for him, and warmed his hands at the fire, seeming neither to need food nor talk, as he went over a train of recollections. Then he roused himself from his sadness, and looking round the room, he said briskly enough, "And where's the new mamma?" "She was tired, and went to bed early. Oh, papa, must I call her mamma?" "I should like it," replied he, with a slight contraction of the brows. Molly was silent. She put a cup of tea near him. He stirred it and sipped it, and then he recurred to the subject. "Why shouldn't you call her mamma? I'm sure she means to do the duty of a mother to you. We all may make mistakes, and her ways may not be quite all at once our ways, but at any rate let us start with a family bond between us." What would Roger say was right? That was the question that rose to Molly's mind. She had always spoken of her father's new wife as Mrs. Gibson, and had once burst out at Miss Brownings with a protestation that she would never call her mamma. She did not feel drawn to her new relation by their intercourse that evening. She kept silence, though she knew her father was expecting an answer. At last he gave up his expectation and turned to another subject, told about their journey, questioned her as to the Hamleys, the Brownings, Lady Harriet, and the afternoon they had passed together at the Manor house. But there was a certain hardness and constraint in his manner, and in hers a heaviness and absence of mind. All at once she said, "Papa, I will call her mamma." He took her hand and grasped it tight, but for an instant or two he did not speak. Then he said, "You won't be sorry for it, Molly, when you come to lie as poor Craven Smith did to-night." For some time the murmurs and grumblings of the two elder servants were confined to Molly's ears, then they spread to her father's, who, to Molly's dismay, made summary work with them. "You don't like Mrs. Gibson's ringing her bell so often, don't you? You've been spoilt, I'm afraid, but if you don't conform to my wife's desires, you have the remedy in your own hands, you know." What servant ever resisted the temptation to give warning after such a speech as that? Betty told Molly she was going to leave, in as indifferent a manner as she could possibly assume towards the girl, whom she had tended and been about for the last 16 years. Molly had hitherto considered her former nurse as a fixture in the house. She would almost as soon have thought of her father's proposing to sever the relationship between them, and here was Betty coolly talking over whether her next place should be in town or country. But a great deal of this was assumed hardness. In a week or two Betty was in floods of tears at the prospect of leaving her nursling, and would fain have stayed and answered all the bells in the house once every quarter of an hour. Even Mr. Gibson's masculine heart was touched by the sorrow of the old servant, which made itself obvious to him every time he came across her, by her broken voice and her swollen eyes. One day he said to Molly, "I wish you'd ask your mamma if Betty might not stay, if she made a proper apology, and all that sort of thing." "I don't think it will be of any use," said Molly, in a mournful voice. "I know she is writing, or has written, about some under-housemaid at the Towers." "Well, all I want is peace and a decent quantity of cheerfulness when I come home. I see enough of tears in other people's houses. After all, Betty has been with us 16 years, a sort of service of the antique world. But the woman may be happier elsewhere. Do as you like about asking mamma, only if she agrees, I shall be quite willing." So Molly tried her hand at making a request to that effect to Mrs. Gibson. Her instinct told her she should be unsuccessful, but surely favour was never refused in so soft a tone. "My dear girl, I should never have thought of sending an old servant away, one who has had the charge of you from your birth, or nearly so. I could not have had the heart to do it. She might have stayed for ever for me, if she had only attended to all my wishes, and I am not unreasonable, am I? But you see she complained, and when your dear papa spoke to her, she gave warning, and it is quite against my principles ever to take an apology from a servant who has given warning." "She is so sorry," pleaded Molly. "She says she will do anything you wish, and attend to all your orders, if she may only stay." "But, sweet one, you seem to forget that I cannot go against my principles, however much I may be sorry for Betty. She should not have given way to ill temper. As I said before, although I never liked her, and considered her a most inefficient servant, thoroughly spoilt by having had no mistress for so long, I should have borne with her, at least I think I should, as long as I could. Now I have all but engaged Maria, who was under housemaid at the Towers, so don't let me hear any more of Betty's sorrow, or anybody else's sorrow, for I'm sure, what with your dear papa's sad stories and other things, I'm getting quite low." Molly was silent for a moment or two. "Have you quite engaged Maria?" asked she. "No, I said all but engaged. Sometimes one would think you did not hear things, dear Molly," replied Mrs. Gibson petulantly. "Maria is living in a place where they don't give her as much wages as she deserves. Perhaps they can't afford it, poor things. I'm always sorry for poverty, and would never speak hardly of those who are not rich. But I have offered her £2 more than she gets at present, so I think she'll leave. At any rate, if they increase her wages, I shall increase my offer in proportion, so I think I'm sure to get her. Such a genteel girl, always brings in a letter on a salver." "Poor Betty," said Molly softly. "Poor old soul! I hope she'll profit by the lesson, I'm sure," sighed out Mrs. Gibson. "But it's a pity we hadn't Maria before the county families began to call." Mrs. Gibson had been highly gratified by the circumstances of so many calls from county families. Her husband was much respected, and many ladies from various halls, courts, and houses, who had profited by his services towards themselves and their families, thought it right to pay his new wife the attention of a call when they drove into Hollingford to shop. The state of expectation into which these calls threw Mrs. Gibson rather diminished Mr. Gibson's domestic comfort. It was awkward to be carrying hot, savoury-smelling dishes from the kitchen to the dining-room at the very moment when high-born ladies, with noses of aristocratic refinement, might be calling. Still more awkward was the accident which happened in consequence of clumsy Betty's haste to open the front door to a lofty footman's rantan, which caused her to set down the basket containing the dirty plates right in his mistress's way, as she stepped gingerly through the comparative darkness of the hall. And then the young men, leaving the dining-room quietly enough, but bursting with long-repressed giggle, or no longer restraining their tendency to practical joking, no matter who might be in the passage when they made their exit. The remedy proposed by Mrs. Gibson for all these distressing grievances was a late dinner. The luncheon for the young men, as she observed to her husband, might be sent into the surgery. A few elegant cold trifles for herself and Molly would not scent the house, and she would always take care to have some little dainty ready for him. He acceded, but unwillingly, for it was an innovation on the habits of a lifetime, and he felt as if he should never be able to arrange his rounds aright with this new-fangled notion of a 6 o'clock dinner. "Don't get any dainties for me, my dear. Bread and cheese is the chief of my diet, like it was that of the old woman's." "I know nothing of your old woman," replied his wife, "but really I cannot allow cheese to come beyond the kitchen." "Then I'll eat it there," said he. "It's close to the stable-yard, and if I come in a hurry I can get it in a moment." "Really, Mr. Gibson, it is astonishing to compare your appearance and manners with your tastes. You look such a gentleman, as dear Lady Cumnor used to say." Then the cook left, also an old servant, though not so old a one as Betty. The cook did not like the trouble of late dinners, and, being a Methodist, she objected on religious grounds to trying any of Mrs. Gibson's new recipes for French dishes. It was not scriptural, she said. There was a deal of mention of food in the Bible, but it was of sheep ready dressed, which meant mutton, and of wine, and of bread and milk, and figs and raisins, of fatted calves, a good well-browned fillet of veal, and such like. But it had always gone against her conscience to cook swine flesh and make raised pork pies, and now if she was to be set to cook heathen dishes after the fashion of the Papists, she'd sooner give it up altogether. So the cook followed in Betty's track, and Mr. Gibson had to satisfy his healthy English appetite on badly made omelettes, rissoles, vol au vents, croquets, and timbales, never being exactly sure what he was eating. He had made up his mind before his marriage to yield in trifles, and be firm in greater things; but the differences of opinion about trifles arose every day, and were perhaps more annoying than if they had related to things of more consequence. Molly knew her father's looks as well as she knew her alphabet. His wife did not, and being an unperceptive person, except when her own interests were dependent upon another person's humour, never found out how he was worried by all the small daily concessions which he made to her will or her whims. He never allowed himself to put any regret into shape, even in his own mind. He repeatedly reminded himself of his wife's good qualities, and comforted himself by thinking they should work together better as time rolled on. But he was very angry at a bachelor great-uncle of Mr. Cox's, who, after taking no notice of his red-headed nephew for years, suddenly sent for him, after the old man had partially recovered from a serious attack of illness, and appointed him his heir, on condition that his great-nephew remained with him during the remainder of his life. This had happened almost directly after Mr. and Mrs. Gibson's return from their wedding journey, and once or twice since that time Mr. Gibson had found himself wondering why the deuce old Benson could not have made up his mind sooner, and so have rid his house of the unwelcome presence of the young lover. To do Mr. Coxe justice, in the very last conversation he had as a pupil with Mr. Gibson, he had said, with hesitating awkwardness, that perhaps the new circumstances in which he should be placed might make some difference with regard to Mr. Gibson's opinion on... "Not at all," said Mr. Gibson quickly. "You are both of you too young to know your own minds, and if my daughter was silly enough to be in love, she should never have to calculate her happiness on the chances of an old man's death. I dare say he'll disinherit you after all. He may do, and then you'd be worse off than ever. No, go away and forget all this nonsense, and when you've done, come back and see us." So Mr. Coxe went away, with an oath of unalterable faithfulness in his heart, and Mr. Gibson had unwillingly to fulfil an old promise made to a gentleman farmer in the neighbourhood a year or two before, and to take the second son of Mr. Brown in young Cox's place. He was to be the last of the race of pupils, and as he was rather more than a year younger than Molly, Mr. Gibson trusted that there would be no repetition of the Coxe romance. End of chapter 15. Read by Kara Schallenberg. www.kray.org, on October 20th, 2006, in Oceanside, California. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Kara Schallenberg. Wives and Daughters, by Elizabeth Gaskell. Chapter 16. The Bride at Home. Among the county people, as Mrs. Gibson termed them, who called upon her as a bride, were the two young Mr. Hamleys. The squire, their father, had done his congratulations, as far as he ever intended to do them, to Mr. Gibson himself when he came to the Hall; but Mrs. Hamley, unable to go and pay visits herself, anxious to show attention to her kind doctor's new wife, and with perhaps a little sympathetic curiosity as to how Molly and her stepmother got on together, made her sons ride over to Hollingford with her cards and apologies. They came into the newly furnished drawing-room, looking bright and fresh from their ride, Osborne first, as usual, perfectly dressed for the occasion, and with the sort of fine manner which sat so well upon him. Roger, looking like a strong-built, cheerful, intelligent country farmer, followed in his brother's train. Mrs. Gibson was dressed for receiving callers, and made the effect she always intended to produce, of a very pretty woman, no longer in first youth, but with such soft manners and such a caressing voice that people forgot to wonder what her real age might be. Molly was dressed better than formerly. Her stepmother saw after that. She disliked anything old or shabby, or out of taste about her. It hurt her eye, and she had already fidgeted Molly into a new amount of care about the manner in which she put on her clothes, arranged her hair, and was gloved and shod. Mrs. Gibson had tried to put her through a course of rosemary washes and creams, in order to improve her tanned complexion, but about that Molly was either forgetful or rebellious, and Mrs. Gibson could not well come up to the girl's bedroom every night and see that she daubed her face and neck over with the cosmetics so carefully provided for her. Still, her appearance was extremely improved, even to Osborne's critical eye. Roger sought rather to discover in her looks and expression whether she was happy or not. His mother had especially charged him to note all these signs. Osborne and Mrs. Gibson made themselves agreeable to each other, according to the approved fashion when a young man calls on a middle-aged bride. They talked of the Shakespeare and musical glasses of the day, each vying with the other in their knowledge of London topics. Molly heard fragments of their conversation in the pauses of silence between Roger and herself. Her hero was coming out in quite a new character, no longer literary or poetical, or romantic or critical. He was now full of the last play, the singers at the opera. He had the advantage over Mrs. Gibson, who in fact only spoke of these things from hearsay, from listening to the talk at the Towers, while Osborne had run up from Cambridge 2 or 3 times to hear this, or to see that, wonder of the season. But she had the advantage over him in greater boldness of invention to eke out her facts, and besides she had more skill in the choice and arrangement of her words, so as to make it appear as if the opinions that were in reality quotations were formed by herself from actual experience or personal observation, such as, in speaking of the mannerisms of a famous Italian singer, she would ask, "Did you observe her constant trick of heaving her shoulders and clasping her hands together before she took a high note?" which was so said as to imply that Mrs. Gibson herself had noticed this trick. Molly, who had a pretty good idea by this time of how her stepmother had passed the last year of her life, listened with no small bewilderment to this conversation, but at length decided that she must misunderstand what they were saying, as she could not gather up the missing links for the necessity of replying to Roger's questions and remarks. Osborne was not the same Osborne he was when with his mother at the Hall. Roger saw her glancing at his brother. "You think my brother looking ill?" said he, lowering his voice. "No, not exactly." "He is not well. Both my father and I are anxious about him. That run on the Continent did him harm instead of good, and his disappointment at his examination has told upon him, I'm afraid." "I was not thinking he looked ill, only changed somehow." "He says he must go back to Cambridge soon. Possibly it may do him good, and I shall be off next week. This is a farewell visit to you, as well as one of congratulation to Mrs. Gibson." "Your mother will feel you're both going away, won't she? But of course young men will always have to live away from home." "Yes," he replied. "Still, she feels it a good deal, and I am not satisfied about her health either. You will go over and see her sometimes, will you? She is very fond of you." "If I may," said Molly, unconsciously glancing at her stepmother. She had an uncomfortable instinct that, in spite of Mrs. Gibson's own perpetual flow of words, she could and did hear everything that fell from Molly's lips. "Do you want any more books?" said he. "If you do, make a list out, and send it to my mother before I leave next Tuesday. After I am gone, there will be no one to go into the library and pick them out." After they were gone, Mrs. Gibson began her usual comments on the departed visitors. "I do like that Osborne Hamley. What a nice fellow he is! Somehow I always do like eldest sons. He will have the estate, won't he? I shall ask your dear papa to encourage him to come about the house. He will be a very good, very pleasant acquaintance for you and Cynthia. The other is but a loutish young fellow, to my mind. There is no aristocratic bearing about him. I suppose he takes after his mother, who is but a parvenue, I've heard them say at the Towers." Molly was spiteful enough to have great pleasure in saying, I think I've heard her father was a Russia merchant, and imported tallow and hemp. Mr. Osborne Hamley is extremely like her." "Indeed! But there's no calculating these things. Anyhow, he is the perfect gentleman in appearance and manner. The estate is entailed, is it not?" "I know nothing about it," said Molly. A short silence ensued. Then Mrs. Gibson said, "Do you know, I almost think I must get dear papa to give a little dinner party, and ask Mr. Osborne Hamley. I should like to have him feel at home in this house. It would be something cheerful for him after the dullness and solitude of Hamley Hall. For the old people don't visit much, I believe." "He's going back to Cambridge next week," said Molly. "Is he? Well, then, we'll put off our little dinner till Cynthia comes home. I should like to have some young society for her, poor darling, when she returns." "When is she coming?" said Molly, who had always a longing curiosity for this same Cynthia's return. "Oh, I'm not sure. Perhaps at the New Year, perhaps not till Easter. I must get this drawing-room all new furnished first, and then I mean to fit up her room and yours just alike. They are just the same size, only on opposite sides of the passage." "Are you going to new furnish that room?" said Molly, in astonishment at the never-ending changes. "Yes, and yours too, darling, so don't be jealous." "Oh, please, mamma, not mine," said Molly, taking in the idea for the first time. "Yes, dear, you shall have yours done as well. A little French bed, and a new paper, and a pretty carpet, and a dressed-up toilette table and glass, will make it look quite a different place." "But I don't want it to look different. I like it as it is. Pray don't do anything to it." "What nonsense, child! I never heard anything more ridiculous. Most girls would be glad to get rid of furniture only fit for the lumber room." "It was my own mamma's before she was married," said Molly, in a very low voice, bringing out this last plea unwillingly, but with a certainty that it would not be resisted. Mrs. Gibson paused for a moment before she replied. "It's very much to your credit that you should have such feelings, I'm sure. But don't you think sentiment may be carried too far? Why, we should have no new furniture at all, and should have to put up with worm-eaten horrors. Besides, my dear, Hollingford will seem very dull to Cynthia, after a pretty gay France, and I want to make the first impressions attractive. I've a notion I can settle her down near here, and I want her to come in a good temper. For, between ourselves, my dear, she is a little wilful. You need not mention this to your papa." "But can't you do Cynthia's room, and not mine? Please let mine alone." "No, indeed, I couldn't agree to that. Only think what would be said of me by everybody, petting my own child, and neglecting my husband's. I couldn't bear it." "No one need know." "In such a tittle-tattle place as Hollingford. Really, Molly, you are either very stupid or very obstinate, or else you don't care what hard things may be said about me, and all for a selfish fancy of your own. No, I owe myself the justice of acting in this matter as I please. Every one shall know I'm not a common stepmother. Every penny I spend on Cynthia I shall spend on you too, so it's no use talking any more about it." So Molly's little white dimity bed, her old-fashioned chest of drawers, and her other cherished relics of her mother's maiden days were consigned to the lumber room; and after a while, when Cynthia and her great French boxes had come home, the old furniture that had filled up the space required for the fresh importation of trunks disappeared into the lumber room. All this time the family at the Towers had been absent. Lady Cumnor had been ordered to Bath for the early part of the winter, and her family were with her there. On dull rainy days Mrs. Gibson used to bethink her of missing the Cumnors, for so she had taken to calling them, since her position had become more independent of theirs. It marked a distinction between her intimacy in the family and the reverential manner in which the townspeople were accustomed to speak of the Earl and the Countess. Both Lady Cumnor and Lady Harriet wrote to their dear Clare from time to time. The former had generally some commissions that she wished to have executed at the Towers or in the town, and no one could do them so well as Clare, who was acquainted with all the tastes and ways of the Countess. These commissions were the cause of various bills for flys and cars from the George Inn. Mr. Gibson pointed out this consequence to his wife, but she, in return, bade him remark that a present of game was pretty sure to follow upon the satisfactory execution of Lady Cumnor's wishes. Somehow Mr. Gibson did not quite like this consequence either, but he was silent about it, at any rate. Lady Harriet's letters were short and amusing. She had that sort of regard for her old governess which prompted her to write from time to time, and to feel glad when the half-voluntary task was accomplished. So there was no real outpouring of confidence, but enough news of the family and gossip of the place she was in, as she thought would make Clare feel that she was not forgotten by her former pupils, intermixed with moderate but sincere expressions of regard. How those letters were quoted and referred to by Mrs. Gibson in her conversations with the Hollingford ladies! She had found out their effect at Ashcombe, and it was not less at Hollingford. But she was rather perplexed at kindly messages to Molly, and at inquiries as to how the Miss Brownings liked the tea she had sent, and Molly had first to explain, and then to narrate at full length all the occurrences of the afternoon at Ashcombe Manor House, and Lady Harriet's call upon her at Miss Brownings'. "What nonsense!" said Mrs. Gibson, with some annoyance. "Lady Harriet only went to see you out of a desire of amusement. She would only make fun of the Miss Brownings, and then they will be quoting her and talking about her, just as if she was their intimate friend." "I don't think she did make fun of them. She really sounded as if she had been very kind." "And you suppose you know her ways better than I do, who have known her these 15 years? I tell you she turns every one into ridicule who does not belong to her set. Why, she used always to speak of the Miss Brownings as Pecksy and Flapsy." "She promised me she would not," said Molly, driven to bay. "Promised you? Lady Harriet? What do you mean?" "Only she spoke of them as Pecksy and Flapsy, and when she talked of coming to call on me at their house, I asked her not to come, if she was going to make fun of them." "Upon my word! With all my long acquaintance with Lady Harriet, I should never have ventured on such impertinence." "I didn't mean it as impertinence," said Molly sturdily, "and I don't think Lady Harriet took it as such." "You can't know anything about it. She can put on any kind of manner." Just then Squire Hamley came in. It was his first call, and Mrs. Gibson gave him a graceful welcome, and was quite ready to accept his apology for its tardiness, and to assure him that she quite understood the pressure of business on every landowner who farmed his own estate. But no such apology was made. He shook her hand heartily, as a mark of congratulation on her good fortune in having secured such a prize as his friend Gibson, but said nothing about his long neglect of duty. Molly, who by this time knew the few strong expressions of his countenance well, was sure that something was the matter, and that he was very much disturbed. He hardly attended to Mrs. Gibson's fluent opening of conversation, for she had already determined to make a favourable impression on the father of the handsome young man who was heir to an estate, besides his own personal agreeableness. But he turned to Molly, and addressing her, said, almost in a low voice, as if he was making a confidence to her that he did not intend Mrs. Gibson to hear, "Molly, we are all wrong at home. Osborne has lost the fellowship at Trinity he went back to try for. Then he has gone and failed miserably in his degree, after all that he said and that his mother said, and I, like a fool, went and boasted about my clever son. I can't understand it. I never expected anything extraordinary from Roger, but Osborne. And then it has thrown madam into one of her bad fits of illness, and she seems to have a fancy for you, child. Your father came to see her this morning. Poor thing, she's very poorly, I'm afraid, and she told him how she should like to have you about her, and he said I might fetch you. You'll come, won't you, my dear? She's not a poor woman, such as many people think it's the only charity to be kind to, but she's just as forlorn of woman's care as if she was poor. Worse, I dare say." "I'll be ready in 10 minutes," said Molly, much touched by the squire's words and manner, never thinking of asking her stepmother's consent, now that she had heard that her father had given his. As she rose to leave the room, Mrs. Gibson, who had only half heard what the squire had said, and was a little affronted at the exclusiveness of his confidence, said, "My dear, where are you going?" "Mrs. Hamley wants me, and papa says I may go," said Molly; and almost at the same time the squire replied, "My wife is ill, and as she's very fond of your daughter, she begged Mr. Gibson to allow her to come to the Hall for a little while, and he kindly said she might, and I'm come to fetch her." "Stop a minute, darling," said Mrs. Gibson to Molly, a slight cloud over her countenance, in spite of her caressing word. "I am sure dear papa quite forgot that you were to go out with me to-night, to visit people," continued she, addressing herself to the squire, "with whom I am quite unacquainted, and it is very uncertain if Mr. Gibson can return in time to go with me, so you see I cannot allow Molly to go with you." "I shouldn't have thought it would have signified. Brides are always brides, I suppose, and it's their part to be timid, but I shouldn't have thought it, in this case. And my wife sets her heart on things, as sick people do. Well, Molly," in a louder tone, for these foregoing sentences were spoken sotto voce, "we must put it off till to-morrow, and it's our loss, not yours," he continued, as he saw the reluctance with which she slowly returned to her place. "You'll be as gay as can be to-night, I dare say." "No, I shall not," broke in Molly. "I never wanted to go, and now I shall want it less than ever." "Hush, my dear," said Mrs. Gibson, and, addressing the squire, she added, "the visiting here is not all one could wish for so young a girl. No young people, no dances, nothing of gaiety. But it is wrong in you, Molly, to speak against such kind friends of your father's, as I understand these cockerels are. Don't give so bad an impression of yourself to the kind squire." Let her alone," quoth he. "I see what she means. She'd rather come and be in my wife's sick room than go out for this visit to-night. Is there no way of getting her off?" "None whatever," said Mrs. Gibson. "An engagement is an engagement with me, and I consider that she is not only engaged to Mrs. Cockerell, but to me, bound to accompany me in my husband's absence." The squire was put out, and when he was put out he had a trick of placing his hands on his knees and whistling softly to himself. Molly knew this phase of his displeasure, and only hoped he would confine himself to this wordless expression of annoyance. It was pretty hard work for her to keep the tears out of her eyes, and she endeavoured to think of something else, rather than dwell on regrets and annoyances. She heard Mrs. Gibson talking on in a sweet monotone, and wished to attend to what she was saying, but the squire's visible annoyance struck sharper on her mind. At length, after a pause of silence, he started up and said, "Well, it's no use. Poor madam, she won't like it. She'll be disappointed. But it's but for one evening. She may come to-morrow, mayn't she? Or will the dissipation of such an evening as she describes be too much for her?" There was a touch of savage irony in his manner which frightened Mrs. Gibson into good behaviour. "She shall be ready at any time you name. I am so sorry. My foolish shyness is in fault, I believe, but still you must acknowledge that an engagement is an engagement." "Did I ever say an engagement was an elephant, madam? However, there's no use saying any more about it, or I shall forget my manners. I'm an old tyrant, and she, lying there in bed, poor girl, has always given me my own way. So you'll excuse me, Mrs. Gibson, won't you, and let Molly come along with me at 10 to-morrow morning?" "Certainly," said Mrs. Gibson, smiling. But when his back was turned, she said to Molly, "Now, my dear, I must never have you exposing me to the ill manners of such a man again. I don't call him a squire, I call him a boor, or a yeoman at best. You must not go on accepting or rejecting invitations as if you were an independent young lady, Molly. Pay me the respect of a reference to my wishes another time, if you please, my dear." "Papa had said I might go," said Molly, choking a little. "As I am now your mamma, your references must be to me for the future. But as you are to go, you may as well look well dressed. I will lend you my new shawl for this visit, if you like it, and my set of green ribbons. I am always indulgent when proper respect is paid to me, and in such a house as Hamley Hall, no one can tell who may be coming and going, even if there is sickness in the family." "Thank you, but I don't want the shawl and the ribbons, please. There will be nobody there except the family. There never is, I think, and now that she is so ill—" Molly was on the point of crying at the thought of her friend lying ill and lonely, and looking for her arrival. Moreover, she was sadly afraid lest the Squire had gone off with the idea that she did not want to come, that she preferred that stupid, stupid party at the Cockerells'. Mrs. Gibson, too, was sorry. She had an uncomfortable consciousness of having given way to temper before a stranger, and a stranger, too, whose good opinion she had meant to cultivate, and she was also annoyed at Molly's tearful face. "What can I do for you to bring you back into good temper?" she said. "First you insist upon your knowing Lady Harriet better than I do, I who have known her for 18 or 19 years at least. Then you jump at invitations without ever consulting me, or thinking of how awkward it would be for me to go stumping into a drawing-room all by myself, following my new name, too, which always makes me feel uncomfortable. It is a sad come-down after Kirkpatrick. And then, when I offer you some of the prettiest things I have got, you say it does not signify how you are dressed. What can I do to please you, Molly? I, who delight in nothing more than peace in a family, to see you sitting there with despair upon your face." Molly could stand it no longer. She went upstairs to her own room, her own smart new room, which hardly yet seemed a familiar place, and began to cry so heartily, and for so long a time, that she stopped at length for very weariness. She thought of Mrs. Hamley wearying for her, of the old hall whose very quietness might become oppressive to an ailing person, of the trust the Squire had had in her that she would come off directly with him. And all this oppressed her much more than the querulousness of her stepmother's words. End of Chapter 16. Read by Kara Schallenberg on October 26th, 2006, in Oceanside, California.